Well, rumor has it that we're going to go into another lockdown. Rumor has it that small businesses are going to be asked not to do business, restaurants, bars, gyms, hair salons, the whole nine yards. What that means is we're going to go backward instead of forward. And what it means is you have to look at ways to get your message out as quickly and efficiently as possible. Hi, this is Kathleen Gage with Power Up for Profits and Plant-Based Eating for Health, and the podcast Rockstar Club, where we help entrepreneurs and experts gain massive visibility through the knowledge of getting lots of podcast interviews. And I was thinking this morning about all the people who have been waiting for things to go back to normal. I've got news for you. Nothing's going to go back to normal. This is normal. What you're experiencing is a lot of uncertainty, a lot of not sure of what the future brings. And yet, if you run a business, especially if you have an online business, especially if you're a speaker, an author, a consultant, a coach, you need to look for ways to get your message out. Even manufacturers and restaurants and virtually any type of business, large corporations, they need to have a way to get their message out. And it always is interesting to me how smaller entrepreneurs, and I mean solo entrepreneurs and small businesses, they know that they should market, and yet for some reason they don't put a lot of effort into it. And I think of the likes of, I was just this morning as I was getting ready, I was thinking of the likes of like McDonald's or Coca-Cola or Apple. We know that those companies exist. We see a McDonald's on virtually every street corner in major cities and in suburbs. You see a lot of McDonald's, and yet they advertise and they advertise and they advertise. They market. They do all sorts of things to get the message out there. So why should it be any different for a solopreneur or a small business owner? And one of the best ways to get your message out is through podcasting, especially right now, in light of the fact that you can't go out and do things the way you used to. Speakers, for example. I'm a professional speaker. I'm a keynote speaker. I'm a trainer. I'm a breakout speaker at conferences. And that has come to a screeching halt to go out and actually get on the platform and speak. Right before COVID, several big contracts that I had in the works, we were ready to sign them with a few clients, and that came to a screeching halt. Now, once I got over the shock, I had to sit back and really evaluate what can I do to keep my name in front of my market and get my message out to market and keep my branding going. And hands down, podcast interviews are the best way to do it. Also being a podcast host, but this particular video is all about getting podcast interviews. And the whole thing is that with podcast interviews, it's a great way, again, to get your branding out there, to get your message out there. If you have a mission you're on, if you have a movement that you're involved with, podcast interviews are a great way to do it. I work with several different types of clients. I have one client who focuses on grieving with ease, and her whole objective is to get on as many podcast shows as possible to help people deal with grieving, especially in light of what's going on now with COVID. Not only the grieving that you go through when you lose a loved one, but the grieving of life as we used to know it, the grieving of our finances, whatever it may be. I have another client who actually is a stroke survivor, and she calls herself a stroke thriver, Marsha Moran. She wrote a book called Stroke Forward, and she gets on a lot of podcast shows, and she talks about healthy eating. She talks about how to be an advocate for people who have had a stroke, how to be your own advocate. And podcasting, hands down, is one of the vehicles. It's the main vehicle that she's using to get her message out there. Lana Nelson, Lana from Montana, who wrote the book, The Food Codes. With the Food Codes, Lana has been on dozens upon dozens of podcast shows. And what's interesting is all of my clients say that when they're on a podcast show, they notice that a lot of activity is taking place, not just with the podcast show, but after the fact. Now, the thing about being on podcast shows, it's not just about being on a show. It's about actually using that opportunity to gain even more visibility on social media. And in an upcoming video, I'm going to talk about how you can actually market on social media organically, not paying for a bunch of ads, but organically market in a way that you reach more of your market. Now, what's interesting about podcast shows is your audiences are very niched. Whatever the topic is, you're going to find a podcast show for it. I have another client who actually wrote a book about women in the priesthood. The book is called Scandal in the Shadows, and Margaret Mary O'Connor is the author. And that's a very, very narrow topic, yet there's a number of ways that she can get her message out. One would be women in the priesthood, any shows that have to do with Catholicism, shows that have to do with being an author, but the shows tend to have a very, very niched listenership or viewership. So as you think of shows that you can get on, as you think of ways to increase your visibility, think in terms of who ultimately do you want to hear and see your message? Who do you ultimately want to hear and see your message? Based on that, those are the types of shows that you go after. Now, be careful not to say, oh, I only want to be on the top 5 or 10 shows. I want the ones with the greatest market reach. That's not necessarily going to be working in your favor. Sometimes the small shows are really the ones where you hit a home run. I love the story about Wayne Dyer. When Wayne Dyer first wrote his book, Your Erroneous Zones, and he was out literally driving from location to location, because this was back in the 80s, and he had books in the trunk of his car, and he would show up to radio stations and do interviews. And where he got discovered wasn't on these huge Oprah type shows. Where he got discovered was on an AM radio station, had very few listeners. It was the middle of the night, and the Johnny Carson producer happened to hear him. Now, some of you may say, well, who's Johnny Carson? If you're over the age of 50 or 60, you definitely remember Johnny Carson. If you're under that age, you may not know who he is. But he was the Jay Leno of the night show, the Tonight Show. And Wayne Dyer was discovered by the producer who was listening to an AM radio program in the middle of the night, heard this guy, said, we need to have this guy on the show, and the rest, as they say, is history. So again, what I encourage you to do is look for opportunities to get on podcast shows. Now, don't just look for 1 or 2. This should be a part of your ongoing marketing. Again, think in terms of the McDonald's of the world. They advertise over and over and over. They keep their name out there over and over and over. Why should you be any different? And what I love about podcast shows is the playing ground has been leveled. The playing field has been leveled. You have more opportunity today than ever before. This is a great time while we're in lockdown, and we may go into another big lockdown and businesses being shut down. This is such an incredible time to evaluate, what are you doing in your business? What are you doing in your marketing? And are you doing all you can to get the best results? If you're unsure of what to do, I encourage you, go to powerupforprofits.com/checklist. That's powerupforprofits.com/checklist and get my free podcast interview checklist. It's about a 15-page document where it has step-by-step what you need to do to get lots of podcast opportunities. And also, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. This is going up on YouTube. I encourage you to subscribe to this channel, and you'll get updates as I do more and more of these, because my big focus right now, due to the fact that a lot of people need to get their name out there and they just don't know how, and podcasting is by far one of the best ways, is I will send you videos every time that they come out. You'll get a notice about it. And if you are a plant-based eater, and I'm talking 100% plant-based eater, and we're going to talk about being very narrow in your approach with host. If the host says they want something specific, you better adhere to that. But I have a show for plant-based eaters, and the only people who come on my show are people who are 100% plant-based vegan. If they do any animal or dairy products, they don't come on the show. And the reason I share that with you is, one, if you're a plant-based eater and you'd like to be considered for the show, reach out to me. If you're reaching out to shows and you're hoping they'll bend the rules because you're so amazing, it's not going to happen. It's like shows that never have guests on, and they've done hundreds of episodes, never having a guest, and you think that you're going to be the first guest they're going to have. Probably not going to happen. This is Kathleen Gage with Power Up for Profits and Plant-Based Eating for Health, and the Podcast Rockstar Club, encouraging you. Get out there, be seen, get on podcast shows. Have a great day.